The summer of 1969 was a hot one, and not just because of the weather. America was still reeling from the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy, and tensions were high. Then, in August, came the news that 9 people had been brutally murdered in Los Angeles by members of a cult led by Charles Manson. Among the dead was pregnant actress Sharon Tate. The murders had every household in America buzzing. So when Jeffrey MacDonald, a decorated army surgeon in Green Beret, said a group of hippies tripping on acid killed his pregnant wife and 2 daughters and left him clinging to life, well, anybody with $1 would bet he was telling the truth. More than 50 years later, it's still debatable whether you would lose that bet. Here's what happened one night in February 1970. Thanks for watching True Crime Recaps. I'm Chris. They'd done it. Jeffrey MacDonald and his wife Colette had the American dream that escaped so many others. They and their 2.5 children were living in a sweet little red brick fourplex on Fort Bragg in North Carolina with plenty of money and a pony named Trooper. Jeff was an army doctor and Colette took classes in English Lit, hoping to become a school teacher once the kids got older. They were the proud parents of 2 daughters. She was 3 months pregnant with their third, a boy, the heir to the glorious McDonald name. The girls sported different personalities. 5-year-old Kimberly was the shy little girl who loved her dolls. 2-year-old Kristen was a loud tomboy who'd fight anyone who was mean to her sister. Life was perfect. Colette even penned a letter to some college friends talking about how her life had never felt so normal. She and Jeffrey were content, and when their son was born, she thought their family would finally be complete. That day never came. On February 16th, Jeffrey took the girls to play with Trooper in the afternoon. After some quality time with the horse, they came home, and Jeffrey showered and changed into a pair of blue pajamas. The family ate dinner together, and Colette left for night classes. Jeffrey put Kristen to bed around 7 and stayed up with Kim to watch TV. When the 5-year-old got tired, he put her to bed in the master bedroom on his side of the bed. Colette came home and the two stayed up a little later to watch Johnny Carson. She went to bed partway through and he fell asleep on the couch to the sound of rain. At 3:42 a.m., Fort Bragg's emergency line got a call from the McDonald residence. It's Jeffrey and he's screaming, "Help, help, 544 Castle Drive, stabbing, hurry." Officers arrived 10 minutes later to find a bloodbath. Colette was face up on the floor, bludgeoned and stabbed to death a total of 47 times with both a knife and an ice pick. Jeffrey was draped face down over her body, his head resting on her chest. He was still alive and pleaded with officers to check on his daughters, but Kim and Kristen suffered similar fates. They found Kim in her bed, beaten to death, her skull fractured and her cheekbone protruding through her skin. Across the hall, they found Kristen covered in 48 stab wounds. On the headboard in the master bedroom, police found the word pig written in Colette's blood. Jeffrey sat up, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Jesus Christ, look at my wife. I'm gonna kill those goddamn acid heads." An ambulance took him to the nearby hospital. At Womack Army Medical Center in Fort Bragg, doctors found it strange that Jeffrey's wounds were almost nothing compared to his wife and children. He had a few cuts, bruises, and a few fingernail wounds to his face and chest. There was a mark in the middle of his forehead, but the skin wasn't broken. He suffered a minor concussion and had a half-inch stab wound in his chest that partially collapsed his lung. The Womack staff surgeon called it clean, small, and sharp. 9 days later, he walked out of the hospital and sat down to answer some questions from military police. By his account, he was up late. It was around 2 a.m. before he headed for bed. But Kristen, a frequent bedwetter, had soiled his side of the bed. He didn't want to wake Colette by changing the sheets, so he brought his daughter into her bedroom and sacked out on the couch. Later, he awoke to Colette's screams. Then, 3 men, 2 white and 1 black, attacked him in the living room. There was a 4th intruder, too, a young white woman with long blonde hair wearing a floppy white hat, knee-high heeled boots, and a black dress. She stood in the corner holding a lit candle, chanting, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." She egged the 3 men on as they beat Jeffrey with a club and stabbed him with an ice pick. They pulled his pajama top over his head and onto his wrists to bind his hands, but he used the binding to fend off the attacks from the ice pick. His attackers eventually overpowered him and he passed out. The acid heads were gone once he came to. He went room to room trying to revive his wife and kids, but nothing worked. He pulled a small paring knife from Colette's chest where he found her body and left it on the floor. Then he draped his pajama top over her torso and called for help. That's Jeffrey's story, and he's stuck to it since February 17th, 1970. Born in New York City in October 1943, Jeffrey MacDonald kept hitting all the right nails on the head. He was voted most likely to succeed by his high school class. They even crowned him king at senior prom. It was there that he fell head over heels for his future wife, Colette Stevenson, whom he dated through high school. As the story goes, they fell in love while holding hands at the movies. But young love faded fast, and Jeffrey and Colette broke up before college. But you just never know what the future has in store, do you? Jeffrey's straight A grades earned him a 3-year scholarship to Princeton. He dated around in college, but he always felt compelled to write letters to Colette. They rekindled their high school flame, and Jeff would hitchhike almost 4 hours from Princeton to Saratoga to visit her at college. It soon became clear they were doing much more than talking during those visits. Colette got pregnant and dropped out of school in the summer of '63. He wasn't expecting to become a father and husband so soon, but as a stand-up guy, Jeffrey married her to raise their child together. And he wasn't a bad catch in the mid-'60s. He was on his way to becoming a doctor, and the picturesque American dream was at Colette's fingertips. Their first daughter, Kim, was born in April of '64. The family settled in Chicago while Jeffrey went to med school. Meanwhile, Colette played the role of the quiet housewife, and she played it well. They moved from a cramped one-bedroom apartment to a lovely middle-class neighborhood in May of '67. Their second daughter, Kristen, was born that same month. They all moved to New Jersey after Jeffrey finished med school in 1968, but the long internship hours took a toll on their relationship. He described it as horrendous for both of them. The internship ended and the family moved for the final time down to Fort Bragg in North Carolina after Jeffrey joined the Army. And while the Vietnam War raged in the background, Jeffrey stayed on the home front and the family continued to thrive. Or so it seemed. By February 1970, they were living on a special part of the base reserved for Army officers, since Jeffrey had recently been promoted to captain. Military police kept a watchful eye over the base, and the family felt safe and secure. They never dreamed the shocking Manson family murders might find their way, however indirectly, into 544 Castle Drive. The morning sun rose on the bloody scene, and in its soft light, military police found the murder weapons outside the home. They included a kitchen knife, an ice pick, and a 31-inch piece of lumber with blood on one end. All three came from the crime scene, and all three were clean of fingerprints. As they dug deeper into Jeffrey's story, they started to think his story had more holes than a golf course. For starters, the living room where he claims he fought for his life against 3 male attackers didn't show any signs of struggle. Someone knocked over a flower pot and a top-heavy coffee table, and a pile of magazines got stuck under the table's edge. Among those magazines was the March 1970 issue of Esquire, which published several articles about cults, drugs, orgies, and violence in California. It focused on the Manson murders, but touched on an acid queen with long blonde locks and 4 male followers. When military police fanned out into the neighborhood, no one remembered hearing a struggle, though they recalled Colette yelling pretty loudly at one point. A 16-year-old neighbor who babysat for the McDonalds said they seemed indifferent to each other and hardly spoke. By the 23rd, they stopped looking for the intruders and started looking more closely at Jeffrey. According to them, the evidence didn't add up. They never found any fibers from Jeff's pajamas in the living room where he claims he used them to fend off the intruders. However, they did find pajama fibers under Colette's body and in both Kim and Kristen's bedrooms. There wasn't any blood on the phone Jeffrey used to call 911 either. They found the bloody tip of a surgical glove behind the headboard, likely used to write the word pig in Colette's blood. The glove was similar to the ones Jeffrey kept in the kitchen. Then there's the question of weather. It was raining that night, and he was adamant that water kept dripping off the blonde woman's boots. Surely, 4 intruders would track mud and footprints all over the house. The only print was a bloody, bare footprint found in Kristen's bedroom. But the victims themselves found a way to tell police what went on that night. It turned out Jeffrey's family had a rare anomaly. All four had different blood types. Jeff was type B, Colette was type A, Kim was AB, and Kristen was O. Now, why does that matter? Because it allowed police to track each person's movements that night like they were watching a reenactment filmed with blood. If he was lying and there was no group of acid head attackers, here's what police think really happened. Little Kristen wet Jeffrey's side of the bed, sparking an argument between husband and wife. It escalated until Colette hit him with a hairbrush, leaving a mark on his forehead. Jeffrey spiraled into a fit of rage and started punching Colette before attacking her with a piece of lumber. But who just keeps lumber in the house? I'm so glad you asked. Jeffrey had recently fixed one of the wooden mattress slats on Kim's bed. When the forensics team tested the lumber, they proved it came from the mattress job, perhaps sawn off to cut the right-sized piece. As he attacked Colette with the wood, Kim woke up and walked into her parents' room. They believe he accidentally hit her with the board, cracking her skull and leaving some brain matter in the doorway. He thought Colette was dead, so he took his mortally wounded daughter into her bedroom and finished the job. In Jeffrey's initial story, he claims he wasn't wearing his pajama top when he tried to revive Kim, but forensics found her blood on the pajama top, suggesting he's the one who killed her, or at least making it clear that his story didn't hold water. But there was still one witness left, so he moved into Kristen's room to kill her too. But before he could, Colette, whose blood was found on Kristen's bedsheets, ran in to protect her daughter. Jeffrey killed them both, then carried his wife back into the master bedroom, leaving a bloody footprint in her blood on his way out. He covered Colette's body with his pajama top and stabbed her repeatedly with an ice pick, which also killed his unborn son. Then he wiped his weapons clean and tossed them out the back door. With one of his surgical gloves, he used his high school sweetheart's blood to paint the word pig on the headboard. Finally, he grabbed a scalpel, walked into the bathroom where they found his blood on the sink, and stabbed himself in the chest, knowing exactly how deep he'd need to cut to cause convincing yet non-life-threatening damage. Then, all he had to do was call the military police and blame it all on the hippies. And just like that, the good doctor was looking more and more like a savage killer. But he stuck to his acid head story. In April, the Army police formally charged him with murdering his wife and children and slated his initial hearing for July. His lawyer went on the offensive, claiming the military police made a mockery of the crime scene, lost evidence, and ruined any chance of finding the real killers. Could he be right? Was Jeffrey telling the truth? One of the responding officers admitted that he saw a blonde girl in a wide-brimmed hat about half a mile away from the crime scene when they arrived, which was weird given the time and poor weather. Then, in August, the defense learned of an 18-year-old girl named Helena Stokely, who fit the description of Jeffrey's attacker. She was a known drug user and part-time informant with a taste for psychedelics. According to their source, Helena ran around with a group of young men, two of which matched his descriptions of his attackers. She had dark hair but owned a blonde wig that she wore a lot. And not only that, but one of the officers remembered seeing her earlier that night, before the murders, wearing the same clothing Jeffrey described. Police questioned her, but she couldn't give them anything resembling a straight answer. She said she and her boyfriend, Greg Mitchell, an army man just back from Vietnam, went out for a drive that night, but they were so high on drugs, they had no idea where they were at the time of the murders. Several months later, she allegedly told people she and Greg couldn't marry until they go out and kill more people. And her brother insisted she admitted to him and others that she was there that night. But she was never brought in to testify at Jeffrey's hearing. Meanwhile, the accused killer testified for 3 days, professing his side of the story. He explained away his blood on the sink, saying he washed his hands before calling the police. He also said he suffered 10 ice pick wounds to the chest, even though nobody at the hospital ever saw such injuries. But his story was enough to convince the colonel, who dismissed the charges against him. The Army granted him an honorable discharge, and Jeffrey moved to California, where he got a job in the ER at St. Mary Medical Center. He moved into a $350,000 condo in Huntington Beach and lived a rather promiscuous lifestyle before falling in love with a 20-year-old flight attendant by the late 70s. But the fight wasn't over. Colette's family stood by Jeffrey at first, but later changed their mind. Her stepfather was his former son-in-law's biggest opponent, and he made it his life's mission to send him to jail. By 1975, Jeffrey was arrested and formally indicted for murder. Before his trial could start, some legal back and forth led to the charges actually being dismissed in early 1976. But 2 years later, the Supreme Court reversed the reversal and said the charges should stick. Finally, in the summer of 1979, he had his day in court. The prosecution poked as many holes as they could in his story, but he stuck to his guns, hoping his defense team's star witness, one Miss Helena Stokely, would clear his name. She didn't. His legal team tried to coax her into a confession, promising immunity if she just admitted to killing Colette and the kids. But Helena was a bit sharper that day. She stood her ground, claiming she didn't know Jeffrey and wasn't there that night. However, she did admit she did indeed own a blonde wig and floppy hat. Unfortunately, none of the people she and Greg allegedly confessed to were allowed to tell the court what they heard. It took the jury 6.5 hours to convict him of first-degree murder, and 4 of them wept as the judge read the verdict. 3 life sentences. But Jeffrey's story still wasn't over. Lawyers, authors, filmmakers, and anyone else who dives into this story have gone back and forth ever since, still arguing as of 2022 about who killed Jeffrey's family. Before and after the murders, Helena had claimed to various people that she was part of a drug cult with a grudge against Jeffrey, but her substance abuse made her an unreliable source. Although, according to People.com, in October 1982, she told his legal team that they went after Jeffrey and his family because he refused medical treatment to drug addicts. They went there that night to have it out with him, and things spiraled out of control. She died of cirrhosis not long after that, but not before confessing to the murders again and again. Her boyfriend Greg also told people he was part of the murders until his death in 1982. But where was the proof? In 2006, DNA testing confirmed Helena and her boyfriend were not at the crime scene. But in the May 2013 issue of The Champion, issued by the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, his longtime legal advocate talked about stumbling across some damning documents in the prosecution's files long after Jeffrey had been convicted. He claims the files showed evidence of long blonde hair from a wig found in a hairbrush at the McDonald house, and that other evidence of intruders was found in key locations in the house, but ultimately buried in an avalanche of discovery. His defense team didn't see it, and the judge and jury never heard it. He's been trying to appeal his conviction ever since, but for one legal reason or another, he's never been able to get a do-over. Whether or not he deserves one has been hotly debated for decades. As of 2022, Jeffrey MacDonald is 78 years old, remarried, and still maintains his innocence from behind bars at the Federal Correctional Institution in Maryland. Paulette, Kim, and Kristen's graves were initially inscribed with the surname McDonald, but that was changed to Colette's maiden name, Stevenson. And the home where they took their last breaths was eventually torn down in favor of a $2 million community center. Over the years, there have been many theories about who killed the McDonald family. Some people believe that Jeffrey MacDonald is innocent, while others believe his alibi was inspired by the Manson family to cover up his own murderous rampage. The truth may never be known, but one thing is certain. This case is one of the most chilling murders in American history. What do you think happened that night? And that's your recap.
Thanks for hanging out with us today.
If you like getting all the crime in half the time, go ahead and tap that subscribe button and the bell so you never miss a story.
We're here Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays, but don't go away. Catch up on more recaps right here, right now.
Until next time, take care.